Okay, I'm going to talk very quickly because I don't want to take too much time over this. I'm going to talk about tourism and resilience, and this is the back of the stand for the Responsible Tourism stand here at WTM. It is extraordinary how large the graphic designer who did this made the word resilience, and it's his choice to have done that. But I think it's really interesting that he has regarded it as so significant amongst all the words that we gave him on sustainable and responsible tourism. One of the problems about sustainability is that we use it often to refer to financial or economic viability. It's about currency, it's about what happens to your currency, both in the places you're selling to and the places where you're selling, the competition you face, the disruptors like Airbnb, and of course the supply side issues that in part Doug was talking about just now, the problems of crowding and the problems of availability of stock. Resilience is a bit more precise. It's about the ability to recover quickly from difficulties. In child psychology and psychologists and teaching, it often talks about the ability to bounce back from difficult experiences. And of course, there's a whole science of work around risk management, about managing risk, building resilience, being able to get back into business very quickly. And particularly, I think, in a sector like travel and tourism, where confidence is incredibly important. It is about insurance and financial protection, health and safety and repatriation. But what we're facing now, in a world where we're beginning to bump up against the limits of growth, is a world in which some of those problems are growing in their significance. We've seen in the last few years, we've seen examples of major problems over disease, particularly with the SARS and Ebola epidemics, problems about crime in some destinations, the rising costs of electricity and water affecting the viability of businesses, extreme weather, industrial action, both in the originating markets and in the destinations, increasing problems of civil disturbance, and of course war and terrorism, and some of that terrorism deliberately now targeting tourists. Now, if we just look at extreme weather, the frequency and the scale of these extreme weather events has increased markedly. It's still contentious, perhaps, about whether that is down to climate change, but the fact that we have to deal with larger numbers of hot days, heat waves, drought, bush and forest fires, hurricanes, storms and flooding are a big part of the problems that we have in tourism, and these things appear to be more common. The effects of these extreme weather events, which we are exposed to, are local, generally, but when they happen, they're devastating. You think about the impact, for example, of a tsunami in a destination. We can only do something about a few of those things. We can do something about the anthropogenic causes of climate change, and we can do something to make our coastal areas more resilient against tsunamis where they're common. But ultimately, we have to adapt. And if you look at some of this is a very disturbing site to look at, really. It's a site called floodlist.com, and what they do is to record examples of extreme weather. And whenever you go on there, you'll find something around the world which has been happening in the last week or so. These issues are becoming more and more common. Now, to come to more recent data, this is the WTM's 2016 industry report, published only yesterday. And what is striking about this is it's actually an odd way up. It's not my graph. I've taken it from the publication. But you see terrorism is a major cause for concern. The next one, though, is travel company scares. That sense of, is your travel company reliable? Is it bonded? Can you rely on it? Then industrial action, and then the refugee crisis, on which we've just had a session downstairs, and health scares related to Zika. So there are increasing concerns about this. One of the things I hope that Nikki will talk about from an adaptive perspective are the travel advisories. Increasing problems caused by travel advisories. Sharm el-Sheikh is still closed for the foreseeable future, which means that they're not going to be getting tourists directly from the UK, and that's bad news for Egypt, clearly. Monaco's cancelled all its Sharm bookings for winter 2016-17, no plans to include the destination in its 2017 programmes. Then we've got natural phenomena like the eruption of the volcanic ash in 2010. Interesting experience because in a way it encouraged people to book with big tour operators because then they were going to be repatriated, and the big tour operators worked hard to get people home from that. But it's, Iceland remains a volcanic area. I don't think there'll be another very big one like that, but the possibility of another, well, not imminently, but the possibility of another eruption is very real. And then you've got people talking in the papers about the implications of the Paris terrorist attack, and the boss of EasyJet saying that it had hit their bookings, but they'd changed their price structure and they were beginning to see a recovery in bookings to Paris. And then you look at the Barcelona plans for the future, their Tourism 2020 strategy, and they're saying tourism is strongly conditioned by geopolitical trends. The predictable exhaustion of traditional sources of energy, increasing tension on an international scale, rising petrol prices have an effect on the cost of tourist travel besides the environmental impacts. And then, of course, we have major impacts like Brexit, which I think a lot of people weren't really expecting to happen. But it has happened. There's now a vote for Brexit. 47% of the industry in the WTM survey, published yesterday, 47% say Brexit will have a negative impact on their company. Now, there's something coming from left field that people were not expecting. 30% saying it will increase prices. In a household survey, again conducted by WTM, 44% of holidaymakers worried about the sterling-euro exchange rate. 43% think it will affect the cost of their holidays. And just to finish on a couple of points about Brexit, 65% of Brits are concerned about the impact, and 42% of firms say Brexit will make it harder to recruit staff. Now, these are all things which affect the resilience of a company as it deals with these things. And you can see there's a lot of concern about different aspects. Exchange rate, obviously, potentially losing the European health card, that will make a big difference to insurance costs for travel to Europe. The risk of increased queues as people have to queue at passport control, the increase in mobile phone roaming charges, and so on. So Brexit was an impact which people were not expecting to see. However, the good news for the tourism industry is that 70% of that sample said that the referendum will have no impact on their holiday choice next year. We'll see. In terms of the inbound market, it's quite interesting for me to see that 42% of people, these are people in the industry, are saying that this will have an impact on the UK's reputation as a holiday destination. That's a very high level being reported by industry-level executives in the travel industry from around the world responding to the WTM travel survey. So it's a very big agenda, and we're not going to deal with all of it. But what I wanted each of the speakers to do is to reflect on how they as a company cope with uncertainty and resilience. So can we start with Thomas Cook? Could you, yes, come and do it from here.
Thank you very much, and thanks for inviting me to participate in this session. So as Harold outlined, I'm happy to offer a few perspectives, not only about how we prepare for resilience, but also to offer some thoughts on how, as a business in the travel and tourism industry, we can help to control aspects of the unpredictable, and where we can't control, we prepare for it. The frequency, as we've just heard, with which we're managing through the challenges that have been posed by some external events in recent months has increased in frequency. And as an industry, one thing we're very good at and experienced at is delivering resilience through this. It's something that by our very nature we're forced to deliver based on the very unpredictable nature of geopolitical events, politics, natural disasters. For us, this will always be the status quo, and it will be the status quo in which we're forced to operate. As a business, we're sharply focused on delivering quality, service, and reliability for our customers despite this, and come what may. For us, customers are at the cornerstone of our ability to grow sustainably. And they are the heart of our resilience planning. This starts from the moment they start to dream about their holiday, the moment they start to think about their holiday. When they come into a Thomas Cook shop or when they visit the website online, we try and maintain transparency and reliability about the holiday that they're looking at. For example, perhaps to advise them on certain risks associated with certain destinations at certain times of year. An obvious one would be hurricane season in the Caribbean. In preparation for when challenging situations do arise, we have a group-wide resilience plan that kicks into action across our 15 source markets. It's very much a living and breathing plan. We test it multiple times each year, and weather-related events, which, as Harold outlined in his presentation, are increasing in frequency, often forms the basis of our simulations. This plan touches every part of our business, including our in-destination team, our customer-facing functions, as well as our communications teams. We also work closely with stakeholders in the industry and in government. And what this really allows us to do is have the knowledge and know-how to kick into action very quickly when something does happen and act robustly. A very specific example of what we do as a situation is unfolding is put into practice our special assistance teams, mobilizing them rapidly to an affected destination to offer on-the-ground support and know-how. In some instances, it's possible to send these teams to safe areas in the proximity of these events, even before they unfold. This was what we were able to do with Hurricane Matthew recently and allowed us to facilitate better, improved communications with our customers as Hurricane Matthew was unfolding. The extra on-the-ground support also allows very quick and personal communication with affected customers, but also their loved ones back home who are eagerly awaiting news. And while we embed resilience planning in everything we do, because, as I said, we have to prepare for that, we are also working towards solving, specifically on weather-related issues, some of the root problems, root causes. And for us, climate change is a big part of that. Climate change affects the health and vitality of the destinations that are core to our business, to our customers, and as an industry, it's our responsibility to address that. Sustainable practices in tourism are fundamentally important to the health of our product and our ability to deliver sustainable long-term growth. To this end, reducing carbon emissions is, first and foremost, a challenge that we are taking very, very seriously. As a business, when we think about how we can be most impactful in reducing our footprint, we are looking across the broad breadth of our operations. For Thomas Cook, this includes energy use in our retail estate, it includes carbon emissions from our airline operations, it includes our human rights record in our supply chain, locally sourced products and how we engage with local communities, and sustainable practices, particularly in our hotel portfolio, around water usage. At Thomas Cook, we adopted our current sustainability strategy back in 2011. This strategy has helped us to deliver one of the most efficient airline fleets in Europe, energy reductions across our retail estate, which have translated into material savings as well for the business, which is always an important consideration when you're trying to make the case for sustainability. In the UK, we also purchased 100% renewable electricity for our property portfolio, and we are implementing vigorously Travel Life, which I'm sure we'll hear more about later, which is an international certification scheme for hotels to manage and improve their social and environmental footprint. We also, as I said, invest heavily in our local labels, which is a sustainable excursions program. This, by no means, isn't all we can be doing, and we recognize that we're on a journey and we need to do quite a lot more, because a sustainable business brings opportunities to improve the customer experience, to reduce business risk, and ensure long-term sustainability. So we are currently in the process of reviewing and strengthening our strategy and approach to sustainability at Thomas Cook as we speak. We want to accelerate our progress so far, focus on each stage the customer makes with us, and hopefully deliver a positive experience and a positive impact with every customer experience. That's it for me. Hopefully we can say a bit more on this in the coming months, but thank you for your time.
Thanks very much indeed. So next we're going to have John Telfer from Explore. Wash my mouth out with soap and water. And you're going to talk about a particular experience that you've had. So I'm going to leave it to you to introduce it.
Well, a number of experiences, really, but first of all, two of my favourite books. One is something called Anti-Fragile. Now, resilience is not just about brute strength, it's not about rigidity, it's about being flexible when something happens. It's an excellent book if you're interested in risk management by Nassim Taleb. And resilience is all about being able to bounce back quickly, not being too rigid about life, because if you are too rigid, then your organisation may break. Secondly, with the story of woe that Harold explained earlier about what's happening in the tourism industry, think about the long view. And having been in tour operations for 31 years, gone through 2 Gulf Wars, gone through SARS, Ebola, a whole list of things. So what's happening right now might sound quite sort of anxiety-making, but actually step back, make a plan, and plan ahead. Last year, if you looked in the press, everything you saw was about Zika. And I was talking about Zika and what we're doing as a company. And there's not much you can actually do apart from advise people not to get bitten by mosquitoes. But what happens, these things are cyclical. And you have this flurry of media interest on a number of subjects. And it's a horrible phrase, but what you have to do is wait until these things become the new normal and they're part of the psyche of the consumer. The second book I'd recommend that you'd all read if you're interested in risk management, and risk is not just about bad things happening, it's taking opportunities with upsides, and that's Black Swan. A Black Swan is an event a bit like September the 11th. Nobody anticipated it, but in hindsight, it seemed obvious that it could happen. And as a tour operator, and to put this into context, we operate in 130 countries. They're all escorted groups with one of our trained leaders, 600 different itineraries. We've got a standing population of 1,000 people around the world, and we've seen practically everything happen. And when you're trying to teach resilience to your ground operators, they're the DMCs that provide transport, accommodation, tour leaders in all those 130 countries, what you have to drill into them is the fact that this will happen to you eventually. Just because it hasn't happened to you doesn't mean it won't. And that's a huge shift for many people. If you're talking about resilience, it's about preparation. You can survive a major event, easy. But what happens to your reputation afterwards? And that's what you should concentrate on. Minimising your risks, still taking some risks, and then having a plan in place to deal with the consequences when, as it will from time to time, go horribly wrong. So that's what we do with our overseas DMCs. We train them. We train them to basically prepare for the worst, but hope for the best. And you can do so much training for your tour leaders and the ground agents, but it's quite difficult to train the extended supply chain, the drivers, the hoteliers, the local city guides. And it's something that's been exciting us for many years. And we were contacted by a German aid agency called GIZ. That's not the correct pronunciation quite, but they're similar to Duffy. They're a development agency, I think the second biggest in the world to USAID. Deal's not quite done yet, but what they want us to do is to come up with training for the extended supply chain in a former Soviet country, and if it works well, to roll that out to many of the other countries where they have representation. That way, our reputation is safe, and also the reputation for tourism in those countries where tourism is still developing, that's safe too. Who do you rely on? Do you rely on governments? Do you rely on industry guidelines? Or do you have to create and invent learning from your own experiences? And what should you do with those experiences? Create guidelines and then roll them out to areas of the world where really there's very little education on the management of risk and the management of incidents. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John. Nikki, would you like to come and give us a long talk about travel life?
There's nothing better than letting other people go first, and then you hear all the things that they think you're going to talk about, which you haven't put in at all. So I will touch on some of those subjects that both Harold and Stephen have teed me up for. Firstly, show of hands, who's been on holiday this year? That's pretty good. Most of the room. Considering the presentation we had at the start, you'd think that most people wouldn't have the confidence to go travelling, wouldn't you? It feels like a very challenging time. There are many different issues, but I think we've got to think about that proportionality of the issues that are actually happening at the moment. One of our main roles at ABTA is really looking at consumer confidence. And that, as Harold has put up there, has been extremely challenged over the last few years. I know from my own role at ABTA, when I came in, crisis management was meant to be about 5% of the role. The rest was meant to be on the longer-term sustainability planning. I would say in the last few years that switched around completely. 95% of it has been crisis management and reacting to different issues that are going on in the world. And the sustainability elements, unfortunately, have had a bit of a knock-on effect in terms of being able to keep the focus on the long term. But I think that there are different issues going on, and tourism is actually, I would personally say, is a very resilient industry. I think there are other industries we compare to that potentially aren't as resilient. And I just want to give you a few examples while I've got a few minutes to talk through some of the issues we've faced and how I believe that tourism in its current state is said quite a resilient industry. There are obviously some events that you can only plan for and then react to when they actually happen with the best will in the world, as John was saying. Planning is the key to everything, but whatever happens won't be the thing that you're thinking has actually happened. So this year, for example, Zika was a very big focus for us. Didn't know an awful lot about it beforehand. I learned very quickly what it was all about. But the media would have had you thought that said this was a very prevalent, awful incident happening to just about everyone travelling all over the world. What you need in these scenarios is to make sure you know who you go to for your facts and your information, to really get the right information out for people who are travelling. And building the confidence is all about building said knowledge and the right information and working with the right partners. With Zika, there were some very, very mixed messages out there. And if I think about some of the people that rang up that were in, should we say, the much older age category, wondering if they would be affected, you can see how the right information wasn't getting to the right people. So it's critical that we work with our partners, with credible partners, to get information out that is factual and from a good evidence base of what is actually happening, and making sure that those who are going to be affected do actually get the right information at the right time. So it's a fine balance sometimes, particularly when there's a new issue that suddenly arises, to get out there quickly to people that have already booked holidays, for example, and aren't thinking in the mode of, I've got to find out about, is the destination okay, because they've already booked it. So how do you make sure you get that information out to people once they've already made those decisions? So you've got the issues you can plan and react to when they come up, and then you've got issues that destinations, I believe, can manage more longer term. If you take, for example, hurricanes, as Stephen mentioned, if I was going to be in a hurricane, I would want to be in Cuba, pretty much. It's a fantastic destination for hurricane management. I've seen their practices in place. I've seen how they move things around. I've seen the recent one that they had, as well as ones over the years. And that, for me, just goes to show you how a destination can be very resilient to very difficult, unpredictable events. They have fantastic plans in place that involve all different networks, from operators to the government to the hoteliers themselves. So everybody knows pretty much what their role is if something like that happens. Flip that over to another destination, which I won't name the actual destination, that had a hurricane go through a few years ago, who were perhaps less prepared, and when it happened there was some significant damage to hotels and the product that people were going overseas to experience. And one of the things I'd say about resilience in this case is, when is it right to accept tourism back to a destination that's faced issues? As Harold mentioned earlier, resilience is about how you bounce back, and it can be too soon to accept tourists back if your locals aren't actually being looked after, if there are water supply issues, for example, as we saw in this particular destination, if the quality of the product is actually going to lead to your customers having a bad experience in your destination and have more of a negative impact on you. You've got to be thinking about, when is the right time to re-enter a destination, as well as when's the right time to support it. And it's a fine balance. As Harold mentioned, Foreign Office travel advisories have a big impact in these scenarios as well. I'm sure some of you are aware of the Foreign Office travel advisories, but basically it's the system that the government has in place to tell us whether or not what their assessment really is of a destination, whether or not they think that it's safe to travel there, or whether or not there are issues that we should be aware of in making our decisions to travel. And it can really impact the destinations that we go to. We've seen Tunisia and Egypt, unfortunately, parts of Egypt, not all of Egypt, Sharm el-Sheikh at the moment, but the whole of Tunisia, closed to British tourists at the moment because of the issues happening there. And they are building the resilience in place to hopefully have British nationals back soon. But that does sort of, again, think about where's our responsibility in terms of supporting destinations that we had lots of Brits in, and suddenly we can't take anybody there. These are quite difficult issues that we're still managing and working through, but making sure that they're not off the radar. So if I give you an example of Tunisia, the Tourist Board actually has been supporting us on a round of regional meetings that we take out to our members. And you'd think, well, it's a strange time to be talking to travel agents and tour operators about Tunisia if you can't go there. It's actually probably the absolute thing they should be doing. So as soon as it comes back on sale, people know exactly what the product is, know what's there, and the fact that the Tunisians have been extremely transparent and very open and honest about the situation that's been going on. And that helps build the confidence, not just in the consumers, but in the travel agents who are actually selling that product, because ultimately they can very much affect a destination by quickly switch selling to somebody if they don't feel confident that the destination is somewhere that they want to send their customers to. Likewise for other destinations that have been temporarily closed, where quality can be affected. If you haven't had tourism in for a while, what we see is often the quality of the product is eroded because you don't have the tourism there, so you haven't got the investment to put into the quality aspects. So we actually work on more proactive initiatives that we call our Champions Programme, which is working behind the scenes with destinations on issues to build resilience and knowledge within countries where they've perhaps not had necessarily the experience of dealing with some of these issues in the past. And that helps people look at the different issues, look at security issues, which are new, emerging issues for a lot of destination, not things that we've had to address in the same way in the past as we do now. Even though, again, proportionately, I would say that this is perhaps a small issue that is affecting places, but it's very, very dominant in the media, so people perceive it as being said a big issue worldwide. So the Champions Programme is the more proactive element of building that knowledge in destinations. And not only we do it from a health and safety and quality side, but also from a sustainability side. And that is looking at, I will mention Travel Life, now you give me the plug. Travel Life is a scheme looking at the social and environmental impacts that a hotel has, but they, as a hotel, individually go through that, but what we can do is actually look at all the data that's aggregated from all those hotels in a particular destination, and that starts to build us up a picture of some of the issues that they're facing, be that resource management, energy, water, etc., to help look at where we can build that resilience in for destinations, particularly where they're growing in tourism, not only those that said are being impacted by the reduction in tourism, but looking at those that are growing and growing rapidly to help them think about where are the resource issues and the resilience that they need to put into the systems that they might not have had in place beforehand. I know I haven't got very long, so I'll finish up now because I'm getting a Harold nod over there. So I think that one of the things I'd end on is making sure that in terms of resilience and making sure that consumers have the confidence is actually having the right partners in place. We work with a number of experts to get our information and advice from, rather than just reacting to what you see potentially in the media headlines. It's absolutely critical to work with our members, as Stephen was saying, making sure you have the plans in place, making sure that you have the right people to go to at the times of crisis for the more reactive issues, and know that you're getting credible information, and know that you've got the longer-term relationships in the destination who are going to give you that credible information on the impacts that they're facing and how you can really work with them to build tourism, both in the short term when they're facing issues, but then for longer term programs as well, and not losing sight of the challenges which we will continue to face, as Harold pointed out very clearly earlier on. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nikki. The mouse is not... just open this up. Najib. Let's hope it goes. Which one? Yeah, Najib. This very big one. Yeah. This one? Yeah. Najib, would you like to come and join us here? I think this is the biggest PowerPoint I've ever seen, which I suspect is because of the quality of the photographs in it. Still there? Taking ages to load. That's nearly open. Najib, I've travelled with Najib quite a lot, actually on the Karakoram Highway in Pakistan. I think probably the best travel experiences I've ever had. I imagine Explore used to sell them.
Used to sell them.
Yeah. And then unfortunately, as we know, the politics of Pakistan changed a little.
Yeah, exactly.
There were one or two terrorist incidents around the world of a certain scale. And the BA holidays, which used to go there, dropped off a cliff, and virtually everybody stopped operating to that part of Pakistan, or indeed almost entirely to Pakistan.
It's 2.97 gig, that's why.
Yeah, I know. It's way too big. Najib, do you want to start talking before? Please. It's going to take another 2 minutes. So. Najib, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Harold. It is very difficult where to start. For me, like someone said, I don't know, working hard for something you don't care is stress. And working hard for something what you do care is passion. So tourism is basically, travel is passion for me. On 11 September, I was up in Nanga Parbat base camp, around, I think it is 4,200 meters, with 11 diplomats from Islamabad. Most of them were British. It was very difficult to understand because there was no television, no radio, and there was one French tourist arrived next day. On that day, we were going up to base camp. And that French tourist, he was trying to explain that something happened in New York. One of the German diplomat, he knew a little bit of French, and he said, well, something went seriously wrong in New York. So we need to go down to the Karakoram Highway. And it was about 1.5 day trek back to the Karakoram Highway. By the time we arrived at Karakoram Highway, there were armored cars were waiting for us because 3 very senior diplomats were traveling. British Deputy High Commissioner, he said to me, Najib, now I know that they're going to take us out of, Pakistan is a beautiful country. It's a movie. Anyway.
Just keep talking. You turn the sound off on this. Keep talking like this.
And then he said to me, Najib, tell them the nearest airport is Skardu, not Islamabad. Probably some of them you may know that part of the world. So we traveled to over the Devasai plain to Skardu. By the time we arrived in Skardu, there was an aircraft was waiting for us. So the British Deputy High Commissioner said to me, Najib, this is the end. So jokingly he said, do something else. By the time we arrived in Islamabad, Islamabad was a different city at all. A lot of journalists from all over the world, which was very new to us. That's how it started, everything going down. And for another 2 years, most of the bigger tour operators who had options either left the country or changed their profession. Some of them, they went into real estate business in Gulf countries, and they started doing many things. But I think probably I was one of the youngest one among the well-reputed tour operators. I had a big team of 37 employees. And for us, it was do and die story. And I just called all my guides and managers and cooks. I said, look, if I change, I can do something else. But if you change, you can find a job. Some of them are very experienced tour guides, and few of them are very good language-speaking guides like French, Japanese, and German. And I said, the best thing is, see, we stick to what we are doing, and what we have to diversify slightly. So what we did was, we tried to go into corporate sector in Pakistan. Started doing team building exercises, retreats. And in 3 years' time, we were one of the largest tour operators doing outdoor retreats. We were able to accommodate 5,000 people at a time. We had such a big camping stuff. And then comes 2007. 2007 was actually when the terrorism started, actual real terrorism started in Pakistan. There were security agencies were attacked, police were attacked, and even public places were, Then corporate sector, like their security officers, they just blocked everything. Then we started taking people outside of the country. Turkey was one of our destinations, Dubai, Oman, Sri Lanka. So we just tried to stay in the business. And then at one stage, in 2011, 2012, there was one very big and bad incident happened that was tourists were directly attacked. From then onward, again, we had no other option because we knew it. The travel advisory was against. For every country except Japan and Malaysia, Thailand. These three countries were not stopping the nationals to come to Pakistan. Rest of the world was shy to come to Pakistan. And then we decided to start looking into domestic tourism. So within 3 years, luckily we learned so many things. I mean, countries like Egypt, Tunisia, even Turkey can learn from us. We have a very important information system. Almost every smaller town has it. Either we have someone works for us. If anything bad happens, the first thing you see, they report it to us. Like, probably you're traveling. This is some of the areas I'm talking about. Babusar Pass, probably the explorer know the area probably better than me. At Babusar Pass, when the season starts from 15 June till end of October, we have a campsite with a satellite communication. They just send us feedbacks almost every hourly. And this year, we had 2.5 million local domestic tourists travel to Gilgit-Baltistan. 2.5 million. Gilgit was completely sold out. Hunza is completely sold out right now. So, if you have faith on your team and yourself, nothing can stop you. So Pakistan is a very important case study for resilience. And I will request you to visit whenever you can. Now British High Commission has changed their travel advisory. It's a positive. You can travel to Gilgit-Baltistan. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Najib. I wanted you to hear that example because if you, in a way, it's at the very extreme end of the problem of resilience in a very difficult situation. Zhu-Jing, would you like to come and respond from UNWTO on this? And then there'll be time for a couple of questions, so I'll be out in the audience with a microphone. Thank you.
Thank you, Harold. It's getting late probably you are thinking more about how to sneak out of this room. So before you do so, first of all, Harold, thank you for inviting the World Tourism Organization to be part of this discussion. As a matter of fact, as Harold knew, I was not supposed to be here. It should have been the Director of Communications, Sandra Caval, who should have been sitting over there. But somehow things happened. So me, who is not familiar with the subject of crisis communication, because I'm heading the Asia department. But having said that, I'm very glad that I'm here, Harold, to be part of this discussion. Because for me, this is an extremely important topic. For those who probably know Professor Goodwin, you usually link him with this word responsibility or responsible tourism. But never, ever you have linked with today's panel discussion on the subject of resilience. And I'm very glad that we have merged these two into one. Why? In the usual narrow sense of the term when it comes to resilience, people tend to think about things relating to post-crisis management, be it natural, especially in my part of the world, Asia and the Pacific, when we experienced tsunami recovery, or be it man-made, those serious bomb attacks one after another in all parts of the world, including the region of Asia and the Pacific. But of course, within our industry, we need to talk about how we can become stronger, more resilient after a particular bomb attack or after a particular natural disaster. But this is probably the narrow sense of the term. What I wanted to bring into today's discussion is the imprint of Dr. Goodwin, and that is about resilience is also about how you can sustain the growth of this industry, and especially in Asia and the Pacific, which has experienced such decades of rapid growth. But can we let it go just in numerical terms? Can we make it not only resilient in economic terms, but also in terms that relate to social aspects, in terms that relate to cultural aspects, in terms that relate to environmental aspects, and especially how tourism can contribute in a resilient way to community development. This is where I see the significance of linking the two into one. Of course, people will say, you at the global body called UNWTO, you are not really at the action level like the Thomas Cook or Explore, or like any other trade associations. People have to continue to work after crisis. What is the message of UNWTO? Probably I wanted to share with you, number one, that we must continue to believe in our faith that this industry, the travel and tourism industry, is indeed and will continue to be strong after a series of crises. And this is the faith that we must continue to believe in. And number two, perhaps it's not only about the philosophical faith, but it's also about our psychology part, that we must not be stopped by the terrorism, because this is exactly what they wanted. They don't want us to continue to travel. So this is probably the second message that I wanted to convey to you. And the third message, I heard from the previous speakers about travel advisories. Now, in our UNWTO, what we believe is that governments, of course, you have the full right to issue travel advisories. But what we wanted to emphasize that when you issue travel advices, you need to have the consciousness of the destination. When you target a particular place, you better make georeferences of the specific place or the site that the attack was taking place, rather than across the board for the entire destination, the entire region, or the entire nation that is being blocked. We should not let this kind of cross-border travel advices to happen. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, on one hand, we need to work in order to make our industry resilient. But what we should not forget is on one hand, we have to guarantee the safety and security of the tourists. But the other hand is that we must continue to work on travel facilitation, to make travel easier and to make travel to be seamless. This is going hand in hand, that we need to have travel both safe and seamless. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed for that. There's time for a couple of questions. Is there anyone who wants to ask a question? Whereabouts are the handheld microphones? Ah.
Hi, I'm Annabeth. I'm with the World Travel and Tourism Council. I wondered if you ever had experience when there was an attack or a crisis or a natural disaster that you across the sector, so within your own sector, if that's tour operators, crews, if you come together and come to a joint resolution or joint action, or whether it's quite each organization operates on its own.
Sounds like. Oh. Yep. Is that working? Oh, okay. No, there is actually a very joined-up process with our members. Who we have about 1,200 members within ABTO that range from crews, big tour operators, smaller tour operators, travel agents, and there is a facility that if anything happens that impacts a member or more than one member. We can instigate a crisis response, be that a crisis conference call that get the affected members on the crisis call together to look at how it's impacted different members, get the latest information from the ground. We actually have what we call resort committees, where there are representatives of our members in destination, and we can get live information from them to find out the real situation. So as much as possible, trying to have a joined-up approach to how we manage the messages out to consumers who are in that destination or who might be going there. The one thing that our members will still do, though, is make their own commercial decisions based on what the advice is to go or to not. But in terms of a joined-up approach and the messaging, we try all the time when an issue happens to make sure there is a consistent message out to consumers so they really have that confidence to know what they should be doing, rather than lots of different people reacting in different ways.
Is there another question anywhere? In which case, could I just ask, is there anything that anyone on the panel would like to say by way of wrapping up? Anything you're burning to say at the end of this? In which case, can I thank the panel on your behalf? I hope you found that interesting. And of course, by tomorrow, we might be talking about the consequences of the American elections for the travel and tourism industry, which Nikki I deliberately didn't mention in my introduction so that we would avoid talking about it. That's for tomorrow. Thank you very much indeed for the panel. The next thing...